Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. If you cannot hear me, please put something in the questions box. If you can hear me, if you can put something in the questions box too, we want to be sure everybody. Nothing. They can hear. Okay, perfect. Thank you, guys. So this morning, we are going to talk about transfers and household changes. My name is Kara Poli. I'm going to be the presenter this morning. I have Carolyn Metzger with me, and she's going to field questions through the questions box, and she's going to post links in the chat for us. The topic will take about an hour, hour and a half, and at about 10:30, we'll take a quick break, and then we'll shift gears and have the open forum presentation. So if you are here for the open forum and you want to leave and come back, you're welcome to do that. But the transfers and household changes information is going to be good for anybody involved in the affordable housing monitored by the department. If you need closed captioning, if you'll look at the bottom of your go-to, I always forget the word, your toolbar for go-to, there should be a little box that has the letters CC in the middle of it. You can click that to turn on closed captioning. If you have any questions, please put those in the questions box. We will not be doing the raised hands feature and unmuting, just in the interest of time and due to the number of people attending this webinar. That what will turn into a time constrictive issue. So time restrictive issue. So we will jump right on in. We've got our mailing address and our physical address. If you need to send us anything, sometimes you guys have to send stuff to asset management or to the department, or your tenants want to know how to get in touch with us. That's the address you would give them. If you want to see where the magic happens, we are on East 11th Street. And aside from about 1 or 2 days a week, a lot of us do work remote. And so we are not in the office. So if you are needing to speak with somebody in person, you would need to make an appointment for that. Our website is listed there. That website's a little over a year old. So hopefully everybody is familiar with it, has had a chance to explore it and kind of navigate the new website. It is a little more user-friendly and intuitive than the previous website. So you can definitely use the search engine that's there and the different resources that are there. They're listed and pretty easy to find the information. The division phone number for the Multifamily Compliance Division is that 305-8869 number. You will probably leave a message. That'll then get forwarded out to a monitor, and we will return your call. If you need a list of monitors because you're not sure who you need to talk to, or you want to just be sure you call somebody specific, that link is on the next page, and Carolyn's going to put that in the chat for us as well. The division does have a toll-free phone number in Texas only. So the way this will work, like I said, we're going to run from about 9 to 10:30, kind of depending on your questions and how in depth we go on the topic at hand. And if that ends at 10 or 10:30, we'll shift gears into the open forum session, and that'll run for about an hour. I will be present to ask any questions. Carolyn will be here during this first part, and then some more folks from the department are going to join us for the open forum session. So that's always a good chance to ask your 811 or your physical inspection questions or your PFC questions. So if you have stuff that pertains to things that are not specific to this webinar offering, we will probably hold those until we get to the open forum session, and then we will ask those questions. So stay with us if your question doesn't get asked. Certificates will not be issued for this webinar. This is a mini webinar. We do not issue certificates for these. You will, however, get an email that says thank you for attending. The recording will be posted on this website. Please reach out to Kara Poli with any questions. So that would be your evidence of attending that you would need to provide if your company asks for that. You will only get that if you used your specific link to attend the training. If you used somebody else's link, or if there's several of you in an office watching together, you will not get one of those emails. You will get the, I'm sorry that you missed the training. please know it'll be recorded and posted on the website email. So I'm not able to reissue those. I'm not able to resend you attended emails. I'm not able to adjust the attendance report. It is built based on who used their links. We rely on the GoTo platform for this and do not have any other way to manipulate that or to add to that. I would encourage you to silence your phones and put an out of office if you're able to do so for your email. This is a quick training, but it's a lot of information, and hopefully you're able to be fully present with us for this hour and a half, and then if you're staying on for the open forum, that additional hour. But we want you to get the most out of this. We want this to be a good resource for you. It will be posted to our website along with the handouts, which you can find up there in your GoToMeeting taskbar. There's a little sheet of paper with a paper clip on it. That's going to be where your handouts are, and that should have the color version of the handout and the black and white version of the handout so that you can use those if you would like to. You'll put all your questions in the questions box, and then Carolyn will put some resources in the chat. The resources that she's putting in the chat, like the links, are going to be the same as what's in the handout. So if you don't want to mess with the chat and you want to just use the handout, you can do that as well. So the resources that I'm talking about, we've got our compliance forms, and those have all been updated with the Housing Opportunity Through Modernization Act information, or HOMA. Our manuals and rules are there. I do want to make sure that you guys all are aware that the Secretary of State changed their website, and so the TNTAC is now, or the Texas Administrative Code, is now located at a different link, and that is now linked on our manuals and rules website. So you'll need to refresh that bookmark if you've got that saved. Utility allowance information, as always, is there. That has not had any changes made, but do check that periodically because sometimes we do make updates to those forms. The income and rent limits are there. I am aware that the income and rent limits were released, or the income limits were released earlier this month. We are working on our income and rent tool. It has not been posted yet. There will be an announcement sent out through our subscription service. So if you are not signed up to receive our email announcements, please sign up as soon as you're able to do so. You can go to our website, scroll all the way to the bottom, click the subscribe button, and fill out the information required to get those emails. And we will announce it once that is posted. We are working diligently on that, so hopefully that'll be posted very soon. All the presentations and recordings that we do are posted at that link there. And those are, as we do new trainings and presentations, we update those. So if you find one, we do try to put the year on there. So if you're thinking, no, I don't want the 2022 utility allowance training, I want the 2024, that's listed there as well. And then the contact list, which Carolyn's already put the link to in our chat, that's going to list all of the multifamily compliance monitors and physical inspectors. So if you think, man, I need to email Kara, but I can't remember her last name, you can go to that website. There are two of us. I'm Kara with a C. The other one is Kara with a K. If you email her your questions, she can help as well. But you're more than welcome to email me. I'm always happy to help answer questions and provide resources. So there are some acronyms that we're going to use today, and I know most of you are thinking, Kara, we know all this, but some people don't. And I always get messages that say, hey, what does this mean? What does this stand for? So I want you to have this as kind of a cheat sheet. We've got the Housing Tax Credit Program, or HTC. Sometimes that's LIHTC, but for the most part, it's HTC. Tax Credit Assistance Program is TCAP. Tax Credit Exchange Program, we shorten to just Exchange. Tax exempt bonds, we shorten to just bond. Texas Housing Trust Fund is the THTF. National Housing Trust Fund is NHTF, and that's important to note because they are very different. Home Investment Partnerships Program is HOME, and this includes home match units. Home American Rescue Plan, or HOME-ARP. Tax Credit Assistance Program repayment funds, and this is kind of the department's version of HOME, so that is different than regular TCAP, but it's going to mirror a lot of those HOME requirements. Neighborhood Stabilization Program, or NSP, and Section 811 Project Rental Assistance, or 811 PRA, or just 811 program is also going to be discussed. So the first three are kind of lumped together. The last 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 are kind of going to be considered other programs. I do try to note that at the top of the slides. So if you have a question about what something applies to, you can always reach out through the questions box and we can further clarify that. So some other terms and definitions that we're going to use: land use restriction agreement, or LURA, and that's the regulatory agreement or the defining document that tells us how your property is going to operate during the federal compliance period and through the extended use period and through the term, and whatever your language is for your specific program, that's the document that tells us what has to happen. The unit status report is the USR, and that is a reporting mechanism for department programs. If you have bond through the city, don't put your bond on our unit status report. If you have something else through the city, but you only have home through us, we should only see home on that unit status report. And if you only have our tax credits, we should only see housing tax credit on that report. The compliance monitoring and tracking system is available online as well. That is CMTS. That's going to be the system where you do all of your quarterly reports, your annual owner's compliance report. Quarterly report was due yesterday. Annual owner's compliance report is due at the end of the month. Hopefully you have done and are working on those. The CMTS system is also going to be where the attachments go. If you've got a monitoring review, it's pretty much kind of the heartbeat of our communication with you guys and y'all's communication with us. So be sure that you're very familiar with that and you have the appropriate access for that. When we're talking about a transfer, and these next three are going to be really important for today's webinar. A transfer is somebody who lives in a low-income project and moves to another low-income unit in that same project. So that can be defined differently based on the housing tax credit programs. A lot of our programs consider the whole property a project, but housing tax credit, exchange, and TCAP are going to have those in specific groupings based on an attachment to the Form 8609. When a household moves from one project to another, even if it's at the same property, it is not considered a transfer. If they move from one project to another, they have to be moved out of the old project and moved into the new project. So those things are not synonymous with transfer. I understand from an operations perspective, it is a transfer because they're all at the same property, but from a program perspective, it's not a transfer. They're different. They need to be handled differently. When we talk about resyndications, this is adding new funds to an existing development that's still regulated under a LURA, and that's going to be a tax credit thing in most cases. Acquisition and rehab is going to be when you add new funds to a property which was not previously funded under a LURA or when the old LURA has expired. Forms 8609 are used for the housing tax credit programs and those that mirror that housing tax credit like exchange and TCAP, to tell us what projects there are, what's the eligible basis, those sorts of things. And for this training, the important piece is going to be the project election made on line 8B. Additionally, the written policies and procedures are important. You want to outline your transfer policies or your move-in, move-out policies if somebody's moving around your property. You need to make sure that your tenants are aware of that. There's a lot of instances where they would need to move to a different unit. Maybe they need a larger unit. Maybe they need a smaller unit. Maybe they need a downstairs, or maybe they want to move upstairs. There's a lot of different reasons, and it's not our job to judge those reasons. It's our job to handle the files correctly and make sure that we are processing those transfers or moves appropriately. And I put my little panda here so that you would be 100% certain to remember that a transfer is not the same thing as a move in or move out. So if we're talking about transfers, we're talking about moving within the project. And that project could be 13 buildings. It could be one building. It could be 2 buildings. But when we're talking about a move in or a move out, that is somebody that's going from one project to another project with regards to the housing tax credit program. So when we refer to a building in this webinar, it's going to be synonymous with bin and will be treated as such during the monitoring review. I've put the definition of bin up there. I think initially this was intended to be a building thing, but you guys and it's perfectly acceptable, have started doing these broken up in a lot of different ways. On your taller buildings, every floor is a different bin. Some of you have individual houses or duplexes, and every building is its own bin. Some of them, every unit is its own bin. Some of them are broken up by wings of a building. So that's perfectly acceptable. But you need to know as the property level person or as a management or an ownership entity what the bins are and what's included in that bin. And then we also need to know at the department. So when you're setting your bins up and your buildings up in CMTS, you want to be sure that you are setting those bins up with the appropriate units so that when we come out to monitor, we know what's in what bin and what follows with the requirements of that. Oh, and there's my little panda again. So bins are not just for buildings anymore, and are now used in a number of different ways to identify different areas of the project. So I wanted to touch base on an over-income household, just to keep kind of continuing with our defining what we're going to talk about today. A household in a housing tax credit program unit goes over income if their annual income is over 140% of the applicable designation, and that's going to be the federal designation. So if you're a property that's 20 at 50, the household does not go OI until they're at they're over 140% of the 50% limit. If you're at a 40 at 60, the household is not considered OI until they're at 140% of the 60% limit. Average income uses the 140 of 60 for 20, 30, 40, 50, and 60% units. And then 70s and 80s would be 140% of that limit. A household in a home program is OI when the household is over the 80% limit. And a household in a National Housing Trust Fund program unit is OI when the household is over the 30% NHTF limit. So going over the designation does not make a household OI. We see this a lot where somebody goes over the 60%, but they don't go over the 140%. And you guys mark them as OI, or you tell the household they're OI. And that's not true. They don't go OI until they go over that 140% for the housing tax credit program, or 80 for the home, or 30 for National Housing Trust Fund. So you want to be sure that you're applying that correctly. Are there any questions before we talk through the rules that pertain to transfers? Okay. So I know this is a lot of words, and I don't intend for you to read the words. I intend for you to have them as a resource. I'm going to talk through the gist of what this slide says so that you have it as a, oh yeah, I remember Kara said this, whenever you do read through it. So the first little paragraph tells you how we determine what a project is at a housing tax credit exchange or TCAP development. We use line 8B on Form 8609, and then you've got to, if you're making a multiple building election, you've got to send in an attachment that's going to list out what buildings, what bins, what their credit is, what their addresses are, to tell us what's in that project. And so that's the owner's responsibility to send to us and then to send to the IRS. So that they know how everything's grouped together with regards to the program. For 100% low income multiple building projects, that's where everything's low income, every building is together, or half your buildings are in one project, half your buildings are another project, but everybody is low income in the project. The household does not have to be certified and should not be certified at the time of a transfer. That's where it would truly be a transfer. The move-in date would remain the same date the household was first certified and designated under the program. So if they moved into your property in 2008 and they said, hey, all my kids are grown, I need to move to a smaller unit. I want a 2-bedroom now instead of this 4-bedroom. You would transfer them within the project, and you would keep that 2008 move-in date and that initial qualifying income on your unit status report. You will not update that to be the 2025 transfer date and income, because you're not certifying them, and you're keeping that original move-in date so that we know that the household was originally certified and eligible in 2008. If every building is its own project for 100% low income or mixed income, at the time of transfer, the household has to be certified and have a current annual income under the established minimum set aside. So if you're 20 at 50, they can't transfer if they have, or they can't move without being under that 50% limit. And then same thing for the 40 at 60, they have to be under that 60% limit. If they're moving between projects, they would have to certify before they can be moved. And if they're under the average income test, you've got to make sure that they meet the designation that you need to have them at in order to maintain the building's average income at 60 or whatever the development is required to maintain. You do have to certify a household when they're moving between projects. You do not have to certify them when they're moving within a project. For a mixed income multiple building project, the low income household retains their program designation, and they can only move within the building if they are over income. So if they are an OI household, they cannot move in the project. They have to stay in their building. Household transfers in the same building for housing tax credit programs. A household can transfer to a new unit within the same building, and the designations just swap. The swapping of designations is going to be the true, is going to happen with any transfers, and you'll see that in our examples that we're going to talk through in just a little bit. Was there any questions on the housing tax credit transfers? Okay. Do you want me to read it?
You can use the 50% with the 140% when you have 30, 50, and 60%?
No. You can only use the 140% of 50% if your election on your Form 8609 is 20 at 50. I think we have one property that has that. So most of the properties in Texas's portfolio are 40 at 60. So that is generally going to be the information that you get. But if you do look at your 8609s and see that it is 20 at 50 as the election, you would use the 140% of the 50%. But you will only use that if your project set aside election is 20 at 50.
Okay, I got another one.
Okay.
I have a 100% tax credit property. Half are in one project, half are in another. If they transfer between projects, do they have to requalify?
If they move between projects, yes, you would have to complete a new certification. So if half your buildings are in one project and the other half are in another project, you can't transfer between projects, but you can move a household if they're qualified to another project. But that would be an instance where you would update the unit status report when they move to the new project, because they've essentially recertified. They've said, hey, we want to move to this new project. They have to be eligible at the time of that move.
Okay, here's a great question. In a VAWA situation, the resident would still have to qualify if changing projects, correct?
That is correct. Income is not held harmless through those VAWA transfers. You would grant the transfer, but they still would have to be eligible under the new project requirements. That get us caught up.
And it's the same for a reasonable accommodation request?
Yes. If you're moving them to a new project for any reason, you have to recertify. You have to certify them as eligible to move into that new unit and make that new unit an eligible low-income unit. That gets us caught up. Perfect. So for all other programs, for household transfers, for bond, Texas Housing Trust Fund, National Housing Trust Fund, HOME, TCAP-RF, NSP, and HOME-ARP, with floating units, a certification is not required at the time of transfer, and they can transfer anywhere in the property. Those programs recognize the whole property as one big project. But if you're layered with housing tax credits, then you're going to want to use the housing tax credit guidelines for the transfer that we just talked about. For National Housing Trust Fund, HOME, TCAP-RF, NSP, and HOME-ARP with fixed units, households may transfer to any unit and do not need to be certified at the time of transfer, but you have to replace that vacated fixed unit, and now you're going to have an extra unit under your program. To my knowledge, we don't have any that have this requirement, so you can kind of table that in your brain. But if you do find that at some point you have fixed units and you have those programs listed, you would want to be sure that you're following the requirements. And I have an example to further explain that as well. For post-15 transfers, they can move throughout the property regardless of 8609 elections. So the example where somebody said they had half their units, half their buildings in one project and half their buildings in another project, Once that property has completed its federal compliance period, those folks can now transfer throughout, and they do not have to certify to move from one project to the other because everything is considered a project. I will say that you want to be sure you have the right 15-year end date before you start doing this, and you know whether or not your owner is planning to get new funds on the property. A lot of times that happens, and then somebody says, oh, well, we were post 15, we transferred them, and then the owner says, well, yeah, but I was getting new funds, and now we've got to certify them as eligible. So be sure you know what's going on before you just start moving folks around without certifying between projects. But if you are truly post 15 and no new funds are coming, you are okay to do this. But on the USR, you will keep that original date and original income that they qualified for their project, and you will not update it to be the move date. Your TIC date will designate, a move date, but you will not do that under the move-in date and the income. You should not be certifying folks when they're transferring within a project. So for 811, program and property requirements, household unit transfers, tenants can transfer to any unit within the development with prior department approval. At the time of the transfer, a new 50059A has to be done to adjust the rents. A certification of annual income may also be required with other layered programs, but you should not do a new 811 certification at the time of transfer under the 811 program. And annual recertifications will continue to be due on the anniversary date of the household's original move-in date. That's going to be true for these others as well. If you transfer, they're going to keep that original move-in date, which means that annual certification requirements are going to continue to follow that original move-in date. For written policies and procedures, you do need to have transfers related to reasonable accommodations addressed in your written policies and procedures. This is here more for informational purposes. I'm not going to discuss this piece, but you should also have outlined in your written policies and procedures how you're going to handle transfers in general at your property, and maybe even tell your tenants where your project lines are drawn. Is every building its own project? Are all the buildings one project? Is it half and half? Or is there a creative coordination of projects that would impact if people are moving between those? So always good to be transparent and give folks lots of information on the upfront end. Any other questions before we?
Do you want to talk about rehabs at all, or are you going to cover that later?
I'm going to cover that at the end of this section.
Okay.
Well, I think I have its own little module for that one, actually.
Okay. We'll answer that in a minute.
So for this section, this is just housing tax credit exchange and TCAP transfers. And we've got examples and images. So what we just went through was the rule. It's kind of the big picture. Now we're going to drill in and really give that some applications. So for housing tax credit exchange and TCAP, the 8609 elections have to tell you whether it's a multiple building project or not. You can see on this one, it says they are, and we've got our attachment, and so we're good to treat those 5 buildings as one project. So somebody in building 1 could move to building 5, and they would not have to certify and would not be certified to move. But in this one, we've got an individual building project. They are not linked with anything else. So if somebody from this bin or this project is moving to another bin or project, they would have to be certified in order to move to that new project. You do need to also remember that your applicable fractions have to be maintained by building. So you can see on this one that it would matter. So if you've got a low-income household trying to move between those projects, if they are individual projects, you're going to certify them. But if that's one big multiple building project and you move somebody from building 1 to building 4, and then in building 1, you accidentally occupy that vacated low-income unit with a market, you're now not meeting your applicable fraction. So you need to be sure that you've got to kind of look at all the pieces of the puzzle before you can have a whole picture. So you've got to know your 8609 elections, you've got to know what your projects are, you've got to know your applicable fractions for the building, and you've got to make sure that everybody's designations are correct so that you can correctly handle transfers or moves throughout your property.
I have a good question.
Okay.
What if nothing is completed on part 2 of the 8609 for the buildings?
Then every building is its own project. So if that bottom section of 8609 right here, you can see, is incomplete, then every building is its own project. So you would not have a completed 8609. So we're going to say that the federal compliance period starts the year after placed in service, and we're going to monitor and treat every building as its own project. So you would not be able to transfer between buildings or between bins. You would have to do certifications for people to move between the bins throughout your property. So it is important that you have this completed. And if you have one where you've elected to have everybody in a multiple building project, but you don't have the attachment as provided to the IRS sent to us, then we're going to treat everything as its own individual project. So you want to be sure as an owner or as an on-site or a management person that these 8609s are complete, they're correct, and they include any attachments that were provided to the IRS. And if we don't have copies of those, go ahead and upload those to us. You can put them to mine or Carolyn's attention or Wendy or Amy. They need to be uploaded by before the second review for the property. So if you've had a review and then you got your 8609s, don't wait till we notify you of a second review. Go ahead and upload those up to us now. You can upload them to us as soon as they're completed and available. A lot of times that helps because then they don't get lost in the shuffle, and then the attachments don't fall off, that sort of a thing. So you want to be sure you're sending those over to us when they're completed. Any other questions before we keep going? Okay. So for 100% low-income multiple building projects, households can transfer to any unit in a 100% low-income multiple building project and retain their program designation. The project election has to be done on line 8B of Form 8609, and we have to have the attachment. The household does not need to be and should not be certified at the time of transfer. The original certification which qualified the household for the program or project remains the applicable certification. The original household qualifying documentation needs to be maintained in the new unit file. The move-in date remains the date the household was first designated under the program, and annual certification requirements should be done within 120 days of the anniversary of the original move-in. So if they moved in February originally, and you transfer them later on in July, they now have, they do not have a transfer or a certification date of July. They keep that February date. So you want to be sure that you are keeping that in your system as their certification date. The unit status report should retain the original move-in date and qualifying income from the time of move-in if it is truly a transfer. So we've got a learning point here. Can the household in unit 411 transfer to the vacant unit in 122? We've got two buildings. They are in the same project. We've got 411 at a 60%. 122 is a vacant 30%. If you think they can transfer, give me a thumbs up. You've got a reactions button on there. It should have a picture of a hand, like a high five. Oh, I've got a mix of both. All right, I'm getting a mix of both. So let's see. Yes, they can transfer. It's a multiple building project. It's 100% low income. They were certified at move-in as eligible. We're good to go. Those designations just swap. You don't have an applicable fraction to worry about because everybody is eligible. So that's not a problem. You will want to be sure that when you move the house, when we come, if we've pulled the household file for 122 after the transfer, it has all that stuff from when they originally moved into 411. You want to be sure that that's still in the file. Are there questions? No? Okay. So for mixed income multiple building projects, low income households retain their program designation when they transfer to a unit in a multiple building project if at the last annual certification their income was less than 140% of the area median income levels set by the minimum set aside. So we've got house A and house B. They're transferring. They're all the same project. They're transferring. That 50% designation is going with them. They get to keep that. So and then whatever house B was will go over to house A as your next household's designation. Now we've got mixed income in multiple building projects. Let's look at this at an example. Can 31 transfer to 51? 31 is a market, 51 is a vacant 50% unit. The answer is no, because now you've got an applicable fraction issue. If you were to move that market unit or market household over to 51 in a low income unit, and remember the unit is going to keep the designation of the household that most recently vacated it. So that is, even though it's vacant, it's still 50% based on the previous household. You would not be able to move them over or do a transfer in this case, because now your applicable fraction is going to get messed up. But if the household in 31 is eligible, they tell you, hey, I changed jobs, my spouse lost their job, or my roommate lost their job, or they lost their income. Maybe now they're eligible at 50%. You would be able to then certify them and transfer them and say, hey, that's where you would complete a certification, and you would keep a cover sheet in the file that says, hey, they transferred, but they also completed a full certification to show us that they were eligible. But you would still leave 31 as a market unit. This is an instance where those designations would not swap. But if it was 21 transferring to 51, the designations would swap. The designations are not tied to a unit. They are tied to a household. The household owns their designation. So you want to be sure you're not saying, nope, I don't have a 50% unit you could transfer to, or 60%. You want to be sure that you're handling transfers correctly and you're swapping those statuses that are attached to the households. So here, 21, I just gave you the answer to this one. Can 21 transfer to 51? Give me a thumbs up if you think they can. This is a mixed income multiple building project. All right, so everybody was listening. Yes. Yes, they can. Because the applicable fraction is the same for each building, you're moving affordable unit to affordable unit. Designations just swap. The new household in 51 retains all their originally qualifying documentation from when they moved into 21. They keep their 60% designation and rent. They move in to 51. Their recertification requirements will follow that date they originally moved into Unit 21. But now they live in 51, so it really is just a swap. Now we've got two buildings that are in one project. We've got mixed income still. Can the household in Unit 31 transfer to 42? Hands up if you think yes. Thumbs down if you think no. I'm seeing resounding thumbs up. So yes, these are market units. It's not going to change your applicable fraction. Maybe 31 wanted to move to 42 because it looks at the pool and it's getting ready to be summertime and they want a better view, or they want to be easier to get to the pool, or whatever their reason is. You would be able to move them. It would not impact your applicable fraction. They're market units, so you just swap them. Now 31 is vacant and 42 is an occupied market unit. Any questions before we, okay. So now we're going to talk a little bit more about over-income households. And remember, an over-income household is somebody with an income exceeding 140% of the applicable limit of the set aside. So if it's 20 at 50, it's 140% of the 50. If it's 40 at 60, it's 140% of the 60% limit. If it's average income, it is 140% of the 60, 70, or 80, depending on their actual designation. These households may transfer within the building, but may not transfer to a unit outside of the building or bin in which the household became OI. The household may not transfer within a multiple building project. The available unit rule is impacted here, and they have to stay within their building. When the household transfers within the building, the statuses will swap, and the newly occupied unit will continue to be considered OI, since the designation follows the household, and the newly vacated unit will have the status from the swapped unit. So we've got an OI household here in 31. We've got a vacant unit number 51 in our second building in our project. They're in the same project. So do we think 31 can transfer to 51? Okay, thumbs up for yes, thumbs down for no. All right, I've seen a couple of thumbs up, but mostly thumbs down. The answer is no. 31 is over income. They can move in their building. So if they need to move into their building, if they need to move throughout their building, they can do that, but they cannot move to unit 51 in another building. And because they're over income, unit 13, that's that vacant market, needs to be occupied with a low income unit before 31 can be turned into a market unit. And if you accidentally occupied unit 13 with a market, then 31 becomes a market unit. You've got an issue of non-compliance, and you've got to correct your applicable fraction. So you want to keep a close eye on these different things. There's a lot of nuances and scenarios that go along with this. So you want to be sure you're keeping an eye on that available unit rule for your mixed income buildings. If they are within the same building or bin, a household can transfer to a new unit within the same bin for the housing tax credit program within the meaning of IRS Notice 8891, which we had earlier on in the training. I had that snippet. The unit designations will swap. So we've got our one huge building here. It's all one bin. We've got 18609. We've got 7 floors or 6 floors, but everything's in one bin or one building. So people can move however they want to throughout this, as long as it's within your transfer requirements. And so here's an example. Here's the inside, the makeup of that building. We've got some markets, we've got some low-income units, we've got some vacants, we've got some occupieds. So can the household in 301 transfer to the unit in 503? What do you think? Thumbs up for yes, thumbs down for no. All right, I'm seeing mostly thumbs up, but a handful of thumbs down. They can transfer. It's all one building. They can move throughout the building or throughout the bin. This is within the same building or bin. Remember, building and bin are synonymous for the purposes of this training. The households can move and the designations would swap. The applicable fraction is based on square footage and must also be maintained. So if those were not the same square footage, you would need to make sure that your applicable fraction is still met. And you might have to tell folks that no, you can't transfer until I occupy 302 with a low income unit or something to that effect. You may have to kind of work on that to make sure your applicable fraction retains its compliance, because that will be impacted since you have market units. Now in this example, if every single unit was its own bin or building for purposes of the tax credit program, you would not have been able to do this transfer. So this really, really is important that you know what your buildings and what your bins are and what are grouped together as a project. The Housing Tax Credit Exchange and TCAP examples. Now we're going to talk about individual building projects where each building or bin is its own project. This is going to be the same for 100% low income and mixed income projects. The development that made the 20 at 50 or 40 at 60 election has to certify the household at the time of move-in to the new project. The household has to be certified and have a current annual income less than the income limit established by the minimum set-aside that the owner elected. For developments that are doing the average income test, the household has to be certified and their current designation averaged together with the other designations in the project must be equal to or less than the percentage represented at the time of application. So sometimes for average income, it always has to be under 60 for the federal requirements, but the LURA may have an additional requirement. So you may have to be under 58 or 56. So you want to be sure that you're still meeting that even with the change of the units and the new certification. So we've got an example. These two buildings are individual building projects. Can the household in 31 transfer to the unit in 51? Thumbs up or thumbs down? If you think it's yes. All right, I'm seeing lots of thumbs down. Correct. They cannot. Each building is its own project. Transfers are not allowed. But what about 21 transferring to 51? Do we think they can do that? We're still in our two individual building projects. Do we think we can transfer? I'm seeing a mix of thumbs up and thumbs down. So this one we can't transfer, but we can move them with a certification if they're still eligible. We can move them. We've got an eye on our applicable fraction, and it's still going to be met because we've still got our right number of low-income units versus market units. And the household from 21 was eligible to, they were still eligible under 60%, so we were able to move them. But now we have a new certification, a new move-in date, a new effective date for annual recertifications that we're going to have to monitor. So yes, we can move them, but they do have to certify. We cannot just transfer. Yeah.
Here's a question. What if someone transfers before their recert is due, but when they recertify in the new building, they're found to be OI? Is that an issue?
Let me think. So if they are transferring, and it is a true transfer, it's one big project, they're transferring within the project, then it's a transfer. They were initially eligible, they transferred, their certification requirements are going to continue to follow the due date from the original certification. If they are OI, they transferred before they were OI, you did not know. And so now they're OI in the unit and in the building that they transferred to, and you would use the available unit or follow the available unit rule for the building they currently reside in. But if it's a situation like this where they move from 21 to 51, and when they come in to certify for 51 to move, they are OI, they cannot leave unit 21. They would have to stay. Does that make sense, or have I just muddied the waters?
I think the short answer is if they transfer before their recert is due, you have no issue. If they transfer after their recert is due and then you complete a late recert and you found that at the time of recert they were OI, yeah, that's a problem.
There you go.
So make sure you do your recerts on time. This
is why I always keep people smarter than myself next to me for these. Thank you. So now we've got average income, unless there were more questions to go over.
If a resident wants to transfer to a unit in another building and the set-asides are different and we do not offer the available unit until we have a unit with the same set-aside, would we be in compliance with fair housing laws?
I'm not a fair housing expert. I'm not going to talk about that. But I'm going to reiterate, and I'm going to say it louder for the people in the back. The designations are not locked into the units. The designations follow the household. So if you have a household that is a 50% in one building and they are going to transfer or move to another unit in another building, and it's a transfer and they don't have to recertify to move, they get to keep their designation. The designations swap. If they do have to certify and they're still eligible at 50%, then you keep their 50% designation with them, and the vacated unit becomes the 60% or the other designation. Stop tying your designations to units. That's not how the program was intended, and that's not how the program should work. So they should not be told they have to wait necessarily to transfer. Sorry, that's a soapbox, because this is what we get complaints about. This is what people call me about weekly. Your tenants are very smart. They have my phone number on speed dial. And I say mine because I'm the one on your utility allowance postings, so they know me. I get mail from them. I get emails. I get calls. They call and they say, hey, I'm 30%. My income hasn't changed. I'm still 30%, but I need a 1-bedroom instead of a 2-bedroom. And they won't let me transfer because they said their only 2-bedroom is a 60% and I can't pay that rent. Okay, the designations swap. I understand from an operations perspective that might be a different thought process, but from a compliance program perspective, the designations swap. I'll get off my soapbox now and move on.
And I guess the caveat to that is we got to comment. If this is an average income site and the buildings are separate projects, the designation may not be able to change.
That is true. If it's average income, which we're about to talk about, it does matter what your designation is because you've got to maintain your building average. But in a lot of cases, you guys are under the required fraction or average. And so, you want to look at that. You don't want to just off the cuff deny a transfer for that reason. And if you're not in an average income deal, then it's different. But your average income set-asides do matter a little bit more. Yes, thank you for that comment. I appreciate it. Again, so I keep.
If the resident wants to qualify for a lower set-aside and move to a smaller unit, would this be considered a new qualification?
So if that's within the project, then yes, you would complete a certification to show that they were eligible for that lower set-aside. But you would put a cover sheet on that says this certification was done so that the household could qualify for the lower set-aside. It was not done for the transfer specifically. And that's going to be true if they stay in their unit. If they're on your 30% wait list and they want to stay in their unit, and their name comes up on the 30% wait list, they can certify as 30% in that unit. It will not, actually, I guess that would not reset their recertification dates because they were already eligible. So that's not an issue. You're recertifying them to show that they meet that lower set aside. But they would not have to transfer to get the lower set aside if they didn't want to, and they would not have to move necessarily. But they would, yes, you would have to have a certification to show that lower set aside. So now let's talk about average income. The comment was perfect, a perfect segue here. We've got 2 buildings, 1 project. Can 31 move to 51, or can 31 transfer to 51? This would be back to an actual transfer. My title doesn't match my thing. I think these are supposed to be individual building projects. Okay, nope, I'm wrong. They're supposed to be 1 project. Yes, they can transfer because every building has an applicable fraction that's still met. Moving the 30% household over to the other household. I apologize, my comment on this one doesn't make as much sense because this one has 100% applicable fraction. The 30% unit can move to the 50%. They can swap because now your fractions are still met and they're under 60 and they're eligible. So if 31 is still eligible, they could certify and move. This slide's a really big mess. I apologize.
Let me get it there.
Yeah, thank you. I don't know why I didn't catch this when I set this slide up. My apologies. So if this is 1 project, if these 2 buildings are in 1 project, they transfer, they swap, designations can swap because your average is still met. If they're individual building projects, 31 would certify to move into 51, and you could, depending on what the designation needed to be to keep your building average, they could keep their designation, or they could apply and certify under the designation that would need to be maintained for your appropriate average income average. Let's see if I did any better on this one. What about 21 and 51? I'm going to just do the thing because I probably screwed this one up too. I promise we did run through this. I'm not sure why these are not making sense. So we've got 21 and 51. Yes, they can move. They've got to certify because they're individual building projects. If 21 is eligible, they could move. They could certify at move. I will fix these before I post the handouts. Yes. They could certify to move. If it's a multiple building project, they could transfer. Your average is maintained. You can see they're both still under the 60%. If they are not the same project, you would certify 21 to move to 51. But it would still be allowed and your average would still be maintained by swapping those set asides. So that kind of backs up what the comment said, but none of the words on this slide. Well, ignore the applicable fraction piece. Okay, we're going to move on from that. I'll fix those slides before I post the answers with the training. So after the first 15 years of the extended use period, all households, regardless of the income level or 8609 elections, will be allowed to transfer between buildings or bins within the development. The original move-in date and qualifying income, I love the pandas, will remain on the unit status report. So if you're post 15, you're keeping that original move-in date. And if the property gets new funds, then this allowance will no longer apply to transfer requirements. You would still keep the same move-in date if you're still going to be one big project, but you would not be able to just transfer throughout the property until 8609 elections are made.
And for some reason, the Panda finds this horrific.
It's scary. Maybe they find the paint job on there exciting. I don't know. I liked the paint job on there. The other pandas were all like snarky comments, though. It was like the panda was sticking his tongue out and that sort of a thing. So I found the most applicable one. So now we've got a post 15 property. Post 15, so all buildings are one project. Can 31 transfer to 51? Thumbs up or thumbs down? What do we think? Yes, they can transfer. Everything's done on a property-wide basis, not a building-by-building basis. So even though there are markets, the markets have to be maintained on a property-wide basis. So if you have to have 7 markets at your property, we're not going to look for the applicable fraction on a building-by-building basis. We're going to say, when we test for a monitoring review, do they only have 7 markets? If yes, then we're going to move on and say that the requirement is met. Other questions on that? Nope. Okay. So now we're going to talk about resyndication, and then we're going to talk about acquisition rehab. I know we had a resyndication, or I feel like we did, and I got one emailed to me for rehab. So resyndication is what happens when an existing property gets an award of new funds to be added onto that same property. That means the requirements are layered, and we have a whole training about resyndication and acquisition rehab that we did a couple months ago. So if you want more details on that, you can reference that training or reach out. But for this one, we're going to talk about it for purposes of 8609s. Since the new award of funding does not have 8609s at the time of funding, we're going to consider every building an individual building project, and households moving from one project or building to the next have to be certified. If the owner has submitted and obtained approval for the intended project elections, which indicate a multiple building project, transfers can be handled accordingly, and the household's move-in date and initial qualifying income will remain in effect on the unit status report. Households may move within the building without being certified, and the original move-in date under the original funding source, not the new funding, and qualifying income will remain in effect on the unit status report. Households are grandfathered in under the original LURA that's existing and do not need to be certified as eligible under the new funding. If the LURA requires additional lower set-asides, households may need to be certified as qualified for the new lower designation, but this should be noted in the file that that's why the certification was done and not done for transfer or moving requirements or to reset the annual requirements. And annual requirements will continue to be done based on the original move-in and qualifying date. When households vacate the property to facilitate the rehab, the USR should reflect the move-out date when the household leaves, and then they have to be fully certified when they move back in. So if they are moving out and they're going to come back when the unit's ready because it's going to be a couple months or it's going to be, however long, then they have to certify when they move back in, and you've got to show that they moved out. They're not going to, you don't hold that unit for them. We have a question? Or no?
No, the original question from before was if they move to a different unit in a different building during the rehab and then they move back to their original unit, did they have to recertify twice?
Every time. Yep. So for acquisition and rehab, this means a property is awarded funds that was not previously funded under department programs or where the original funding term has expired. The unit status report can reflect the original move-in date, but the income and the tick date should be the qualifying date under the new funding. Since there are no 8609s at the time of funding, households moving from one building to another must be certified as eligible households before moving. And if the owner obtained approval for the intended project elections, which indicates a multiple building project, transfers can be handled accordingly. Households may move within the building without being certified again once that required certification is completed. But households move between buildings or between projects are not going to be able to do that. They're going to have to be certified. And then if they move back to their original unit, they have to be certified again, unless they move after 8609s are done and everything's in the same project. Households certified within 120 days of the acquisition date will use the date of acquisition as the certification effective date. If the initial certification is completed after the 120 days of the effective date, it'll be the date the certification is completed, and annual certification requirements will be based on the anniversary of the effective date of this certification. Same thing here. If they vacate to facilitate the rehab, they have to be certified when they move back in, and they have to be a move out on the USR. What you got?
How do we obtain approval for multiple building projects during rehab? We have a letter from the CPA of the intention of what buildings are part of each project. Will that work?
You would, yes, I think that will work. You will need to upload that into the development CMTS attachment system to the attention of Wendy Quackenbush. And then she reviews those. She's the only one that will review those and issue an approval. And that approval won't lower the number of files that we look at when we come out before 8609s are issued, but we will look at it with regards to transfers and recertification requirements. Did I get us caught up on questions? Perfect. Oh, you got another?
No, yeah, we're
okay. Did we answer this question that we got emailed? I think so, yeah. So some transfers keys to success, knowing what each building's applicable fraction is, and knowing that it's a building rule and has to be maintained on a building by building basis. An over income household cannot transfer outside the building in which they reside and became over income in. Know the project elections on Form 8609, line 8B. Transfer fees cannot be charged when the move is a response to a reasonable accommodation or a VAWA request. Transfer fees cannot be charged if the household is being moved from one unit to another by the owner. Moving from one project to another is not a transfer, it's a move in or move out. When the household transfers within the building or bin or project, the original qualifying documentation must be maintained in the tenant file to show eligibility at initial certification. If the property is layered with other funding like rural development or project-based Section 8, and is required to certify for the transfer, this will not apply to the department programs. Original qualifying dates and income for the project will apply and be the guide for recertification requirements. So if you have acquisition rehab funds on something that has rural development layered with it, and you certified everybody within 120 days of the acquisition date for that new funding, and then for rural development, you've maintained their annual requirements, that rural development certification is not going to satisfy the department program certification requirements unless it happens to fall within 120 days of that other date. And so you're going to have two different dates to manage. You're going to have the acquisition date to manage, and then your RD or project-based Section 8 requirement. We have questions? Okay. So now we're going to talk about all the other programs, and they're a lot easier because they don't have project elections. The whole property is one property. So household transfers for bond, Texas Housing Trust Fund, National Housing Trust Fund, HOME, TCAP-RF, NSP, and HOME-ARP with floating units. The households may transfer to any unit within the development. The programs consider the property a whole project or the whole property a project, and there are no elections made by the owner. A certification is not required at the time of transfer, and it should not be certified if this is the only program you've got at the time of transfer. But if you're layered with housing tax credit, remember you're going to follow those requirements. If the household transfers to a different unit type, the development must maintain the unit type dispersion as reflected in the LURA if there is one, and then release the vacated unit to a program eligible household. If the development is required to perform annual income certifications, the recertification is due on the anniversary date of the original move-in date to the development, not the transfer date. So now we've got a floating unit. We've only got bond funding. Can 31 transfer to 51? Thumbs up for yes, thumbs down for no. Yes, they can. It's bond only. They can transfer throughout the whole property, and the eligible tenant doesn't have the same ramifications as an available unit rule because it's property-wide if it's not layered with housing tax credits. If it were layered with housing tax credits, we might have a different scenario. But you've got to treat each property or each program kind of independent and concurrent. Do we have a question before we keep going?
If a property is layered with HUD and they request a UT, which is a unit transfer, right?
Yes.
To a different project, and they are in a 30% and the only unit available is a 50%, can we swap designations if they still meet the 30%?
Yes, you can swap designations. Is it average income?
No, it's just layered with HUD.
Yes, you can swap the designations, but you may have multiple certification dates to manage if they transferred on the HUD side, but it was a move-in to a different project on the tax credit side. Yeah, it looks like that's the answer. So, okay. So now we've got a fixed unit situation. And remember I said we don't have, if we have any of these, they're very few. So if you don't know anything about fixed units, now is a good time to go make a cup of coffee. These programs listed: National Housing Trust Fund, HOME, TCAP-RF, NSP, and HOME-ARP. With fixed units, they consider the whole property a project. There's no elections other than what units are fixed under the program. Households can transfer to any unit and do not need to be certified at the time of transfer. The designation moves with the household, but that vacated fixed unit, if the person moves to an unfixed unit, has to be released under the program. So you may have an additional fixed unit now, or an additional program unit that you didn't have before. The designations will not swap, and if the new unit was not a fixed unit in the program, if it was, you'll swap them just like in tax credit. If the development is required to perform annual income recertifications, the recertification follows that original move-in date. And if you're layered with housing tax credits, you will follow those transfer guidelines that we've talked about. So now we've got a home unit, home program property that is just home. We've got fixed units. We can see that some of these have designations, some of them don't. So the ones with designations are our fixed units. Can 21 transfer to 42? Thumbs up for yes, thumbs down for no. Oh, my mouse went to sleep. So yes, they can transfer, but now 21 was a fixed program unit, 42 was not. So now we've got a unit in 42, or a household in 42 that's a home program unit, but 21 is also still a home program unit. So we would have to maintain both of those, and now we've got an extra home unit. So you would have to keep those restricted rent-wise and make sure that the household you move into 21 is an eligible 80% household under the home program. For 811, the household must complete a unit transfer certification. The household will keep their annual recertification from the previous unit. They must execute a new lease contract, complete a move-in, move-out inspection, and address the security deposit, the security and pet deposit requirements. We do have an 811 certification training coming up on April 30th. So if you have more questions about the unit transfer certifications, you can join us for that, or you can stay on for office hours, and Justin Merrill, our 811 monitor, will join us for that. So I do want to talk a little bit about household changes, unless we have transfer questions to answer before we shift gears.
We had a question about app rehabs.
Okay.
If the property went through resyndication and that household was qualified within 120 days of acquisition, and then the rehab starts and they move off site, when they move back into the same unit, they have to be requalified, right?
Yes.
Does it matter how long they were off site?
If they left for 2 weeks because you were doing a quick rehab, maybe not. Maybe they keep possession of the unit. But if they turned in keys to you and they left and their stuff left, that's a move out and a move in. And I don't think there's any, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think there's any set in stone time. But, if you as an owner put them up in a hotel for 2 weeks and then they came back and they went right back into that unit and it was more like a vacation, I can spin that. But if they left, they took their stuff, they turned in keys with no set in stone return date, I think that's a move out. And if that's something you want to discuss offline, we can talk through a couple different scenarios on that. But I think, unless they retained possession, retained their keys, and could come and go as they wanted to, I don't think they can be considered still occupying the unit.
That's it.
All right. You agree with that assessment? Okay. All right. So for household changes, again, we've got our projects, our programs broken out because it's different. For housing tax credit, exchange, and TCAP projects, the addition of a new household member to an existing low-income household requires screening and income asset verification for the new member of the household, including first-hand and/or third-party verification. The treatment will depend on whether the building is mixed use or 100%. For 100% HTC projects, the new household member's income is added to the existing household certification. So that's their move-in. And for mixed use, it'll be added to the most recent certification. And if now the household is over income, you would have to follow the available unit rule as we've talked about. But for 100% housing tax credit projects, you can add them. Nobody goes OI because every unit you move in, every household you move in is low income. So you're constantly following the available unit rule. So even if they are over income, you're still following the requirements. On a housing tax credit project, if the original household has moved out, a household may continue to add members as long as at least one member of the original low-income household continues to live in the unit. Once all the original tenants have moved out of the unit, the remaining tenants must be certified as a new income qualified household unless for mixed use projects, the newly created household was income qualified or the remaining tenants were independently income qualified at the time they moved in. For 100% housing tax credit projects, the remaining tenants were independently income qualified at the time they moved into the unit. So that's one of the other reasons it's important to qualify those folks when they add to the household. For decreases in family size, you don't trigger an income certification. Subsequent annual income recertifications will be based on the income of the remaining members of the household. If the remaining household's income is more than 140% of the income limit at the time of annual recertification, then the available unit rule is applicable. The tenant file must be properly documented to explain the household changes. Failure to properly document the tenant file may result in non-compliance. It's incredibly confusing for us as monitors when we come and we see an initial certification with a parent and 2 children, and then a couple years later we've got another adult added, and then the next year that adult disappears. So make sure you're documenting those files and you're properly qualifying the additions to the household and documenting when a person leaves the household. So for other programs, the addition of new members requires an income qualification for the new member of the household, including third-party or first-hand verifications. The new household member's income is added to the existing household's most recent certification. If the income addition causes a HOME-ARP, or TCAP-RF unit to go over the 80% limit, the household's income must be fully qualified. So now you've got to get that other household member or those other household members that were already there to do their new income certification or income documentation. And then you're going to have to adjust the income for the household. The household continues to be income qualified if the income of the new member is taken into consideration with the income of the existing household for purposes of the available unit rule. If the household is now over the 140% limit for the bond program, the available unit rule applies. Decreases to family size do not trigger immediate income certification of the household. Subsequent annual income certifications need to be based on the income of the remaining members of the household and then the new household size. If the remaining household is over income as established by program rules, at the time of the annual recertification, then the available unit rule is applicable. The tenant file must be properly documented to explain the household changes. Failure to properly document a tenant file may result in noncompliance. For 811, household additions, currently the household must complete an interim recertification. When adding a new adult, the adult must execute the normal HUD forms, but also the lease and lease addenda in place. Adult children cannot be added to the household after initial occupancy unless they are performing the role of a live-in aid, which must be verified. For decreases, currently the household must complete an interim recertification. When removing an adult, the interim is used to remove that adult and the income associated. This may result in a change to tenant rent. That's all I got for transfers and household changes, unless we have questions. We've got about 15 minutes before we need to shift gears into the open forum. So if there's any questions or anything we didn't address, please ask it now or forever hold your peace. Just kidding. You can always email us with questions. Don't be embarrassed. We won't tell the world who the question came from. Glad you like that, Patty. Thanks. I like a little giggle. And I will fix those average income examples before I post this. I am not sure how we all missed that when we reviewed it. I don't think the links were wrong. I think when you copy and paste out of PowerPoint, they don't work. And I think I didn't remember that until you were redoing them. So my apologies for that. Thank you. If you are leaving us now, you will be prompted to complete a survey. I appreciate your responses. It's quick. It's like 4 questions. You tell me if we did a good job, if you got the information you needed, if you have suggestions for future training or unanswered, or even if they were unasked questions. I will respond by email. It'll probably take me the next couple weeks to get that done. I do go out into the field next week and the following week. So I won't have quite as much dedicated time as I normally do for these, but I will do my best to get you a response over the next week. I appreciate the survey responses. They really help me, when my brain doesn't process what we've got going on. Our next office hours is going to be May the 9th. That announcement and registration information went out earlier this week. That is going to be a topic of PFC's post. House Bill 2701, is that the right number? 2071. That is going to be presented by our PFC folks again, like they did last month. So that'll be May the 9th. If you are involved in the PFC programs and have those questions, that's going to be a great resource for you. And then in June, I think we're going to talk about some common issues of noncompliance. And then July and August, we're actually going to take office hours off. Because in June, July, and the first couple weeks of August, I'm going to do what's called a lunch and learn, where I am breaking down the income determination training into smaller bite-sized chunks. Kind of that whole old adage about how do you eat an elephant? You take it one bite at a time. So we're going to talk about that in chunks, which I think is going to be helpful when you guys reference that. Those announcements will start in early May. Each week you'll have to register, but it'll come out about a month in advance, so you have time to plan for that. And if you think, I don't need to know about that one, I'm just going to wait till she posts the recording, that is perfectly fine as well. They'll be a great resource when you have new staff start, or when you think, man, I really don't understand assets or students or whatever, that'll be there. So that's kind of what's coming down the pipeline to get us through this summer. Do we have questions coming in that we need to go over?
Yeah.
Okay.
We got lots of unrelated questions that should probably wait until.
Okay. Yeah. They can go ahead and start putting those in, but we will wait. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording. Thank you guys for joining us for our transfers and household changes training. We appreciate you being here. Stay tuned. We are going to shift gears to office hours in just a moment.